Hello and welcome to Mindful Mondays. My name is Michelle Precourt and it's a real pleasure to be with you here today. We're here to talk today about professionalism in the midst of workplace conflict. But before we do that, a couple of things I want to bring to the forefront. First, I'd like to pause and reflect on where I'm calling in from, and I invite all of my viewers to do the same. I'm calling in from the Indigenous lands of the Squamish people, otherwise known as Squamish, British Columbia. To our viewers, please share in the chat where you are calling in from. We love to hear from you. And of course, give us a thumbs up, or maybe it's a thumbs down. Maybe you disagree with something that Julie and I are going to talk about today. And that's okay. We'll get into conflict. We can disagree today for sure. I also would like to share for any of our new viewers what Mindful Mondays is all about. Really, this is around sharing thought leadership, and we have an amazing thought leader today. We're going to get to Julia right away. But this is around thought leadership on organizational issues, HR hot topics. We've talked about a number of different issues: career-related stress, recruitment issues, mental health at work. And today we are here to talk about conflict. So let me tell you about today's guest. Julia Menard is someone who's an expert on helping. She loves to help leaders transform conflict. She's earned a master's in educational psychology through the University of Victoria and specializes in leadership. She's also done some amazing things, like that's not an achievement on its own. She's a published author of a book called Hold On to Yourself, How to Stay Cool in Hot Conversations. And we've got a little gift for you. So you got to hang tight till the end to hear more about that. She also does a great job on a podcast called On Conflict. And she's the founder of the On Conflict Leadership Institute. So welcome to Mindful Mondays, Julia. How are you today?
Good. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. And Michelle, I did also want to share that I'm on the Wasanich lands and known as Victoria in the colonial context. So just wanted to also pay my honor and respect for being on these lands.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that. So let's dive into things. I do want to just check who's online today. I'm going to take a quick peek at my other screen here. Hello, Felicia, calling in from Brampton, Ontario. Nice to see you today. We've got Doreen. Doreen's calling in. I know she's in the Vancouver greater area. She was also an amazing intern for Mindful HR Services. I hope you're doing well in your new role, Doreen. Let's talk soon. Elizabeth always shows up each and every time. So thankful for your presence here today. And I know that there's going to be more guests. Well, there's at least 10 here who are live with us now. So we'd love to hear from you as well. So with that, let's get into today's conversation. And what we've titled this today is Professionalism in the Midst of Conflict. And so the first place where I'd like to start is with professionalism. I'd like to hear your perspective on this, Julia. Like what does professionalism really mean?
Thank you, Michelle. And I love the title of the talk today, which you came up with. So I appreciate your creativity, and you're putting your finger right on the pulse, because of course, a lot of times when I get called in as a mediator, it's because somebody has decided something is not professional or not respectful. Those two words can often be used interchangeably, although there's a bit more definition around respect. But professionalism, I would define that as something that is a collective definition, because what might seem professional to you may be a different definition for me. For me, it might be okay that when I have my coffee, I leave it in the staff room sink, because I know that other people seem to do I use coffee cups as a common one, because I think a lot of people can relate to it, and it's fairly light. But it might be okay for me because, I do other people's dishes, or it's just something that I think is not a big deal. Whereas for you, your definition of professionalism might be that each person takes full responsibility for themselves and they don't expect that somebody else is going to clean up after them and be like their mother. And so, unless we have dialogue about our differences, then we won't be able to co create these definitions of what we mean together about where those lines are.
Yeah, thanks for that real life analogy, because the office kitchens can be a bone of contention for sure. Well, for me, what comes to mind is, of course, my background is in HR as an HR consultant. I work with organizations to help them with setting up their foundations. And so I think about code of conduct that's clearly written, policies and documentations, and that only goes so far. Of course, we're all human, we're all individuals, we all have our own belief systems and our own values that we bring, and so it's a bit like the bell curve, right? So ideally, in that bell curve, you've got people who are kind of in the middle somewhere, but there's always going to be the outliers, the people who are like, everything has to be pristine, and this idea of even dress codes, like we need to wear suits and ties and this sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And then the folks on the other side who, it's okay if I show up to work with a mustard stain on my shirt, right? So a dress code is not something that I like to dabble in, because it's just, who really wants to be the dress code police anyway?
Yeah.
But it gives you a bit of an idea that there's perceptions, and then there's simply some of the policies and the language that we use in the workplace, and what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. And sometimes we really need those strong foundations to make sure that we're in line with what we deem as professional. The other thing about all of this is that we're not perfect. And so I think about the leaders of organizations who are trying really hard to lead in a way that is meaningful and makes sense for the organization, makes sense for the organizational culture, makes sense for them. But guess what? Leaders make mistakes too. And so I think when something like that happens, it's important to take a step back and go, you know what? I'm human. I made a mistake. Let's, how can we move on from this? And so generally there's a process, right, Julia? This is why people hire people like you, Julia, for conflict resolution and issues around workplace challenges. But then there's also the after effects and self-care. And so I want to put a bit of a plug in for that, because I think we all evolve as people, and this idea of professionalism or conflict, which we're going to talk to you a little bit further, that you need to take care of yourself. So whatever that might be, however that might look like. But I do want to share one technique that I use. Of course, many of our viewers know that I've got a background in meditation and mindfulness. This is where mindful HR services came to be. And I've developed what I call the CARE model. And this is the CARE model mindful meditation that's available on Insight Timer. I'm going to share the link very shortly. But CARE is actually an acronym for connect. So connect with yourself, release whatever it is that you might need to let go of. Connect, allow whatever it is, but without judgment, release that. And then just breathe and exhale. So connect, allow, release, exhale. So that's a little bit further about once you get through the hard stuff, take care of yourself, and do it regularly. So I'm going to pause there, because I have no doubt you have more to add.
Well, I was just thinking as you were talking, firstly, I was noticing what you were saying in terms of caring and allowing and releasing and exhaling. And I was feeling it in my body. So that's the first thing. Thank you for that, Michelle. And what I was thinking about with regard to professionalism and conflict, we can get so tight so quickly into our no states. in conflict that having a reminder about how to reattach to ourselves is so vitally important. And so I appreciate that you've got a tool. And certainly the book that I wrote, Hold On to Yourself, How to Stay Cool in Hot Conversations, came completely from that need. Now, I see that need to be calm as the starting point and
Mm.
the piece that you need to move through the conversation. So, and it's the touchstone that you need to come back to in the conversation. And there's a lot of pieces around the conversation. The foundation is staying attached to yourself. The foundation is being mindful. And if you don't have the concepts and the skills to be able to navigate through those differences, which is what I think I'm most passionate about, then you can continue to self-soothe, but you're going to have to do a lot of it, Michelle, because you're going to continue to have the issues come up. So it's going to have to be continually going back to the breath because you're re-stimulated and re-stimulated. So, how do we engage it with those differences and move through the lack of professionalism, which is what I think we want to kind of dive in a little bit more deeper into as well.
For sure. Yeah. I have this expression, your best self is your relaxed self. And that if you've got a way to self-manage and self-regulate, then you can move forward with a little bit. Your mind is just going to be a little bit more clear.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
I also want to just go back to our group here. A few more folks have joined us. Hi, Stefan, calling all the way in from Massachusetts. Nice to see we've crossed countries today.
Mm-hmm.
And John McGraw, John is doing all kinds of work in with new Canadians and helping them to adjust to Canadian culture. So reach out to John if you need some support in that avenue. And I just shared as well, Julia, a couple of your links as well. So folks, please reach out to Julia. She's got so much knowledge to share.
Thank you.
So let's take another look here at what we're going to talk about. So people are uncomfortable with conflict, right? I do believe, and I don't know if it's just because of this discomfort, but I don't know. Let me pause there. Do you agree that most people are uncomfortable with conflict, Julia?
Absolutely. And there's lots of reasons for that, Michelle. It's interesting. Oftentimes I go into organizations, and no matter what organization, whether it's healthcare, which I've been in, government, education, so I've been in so many contexts, victim offender mediation, school mediations. Over 30 years, I've done a lot of different kinds of mediations, and people tend to pull me aside and tell me this secret about their culture. They'll say, you know what, we avoid conflict around here. I'm like, yeah, I think I've heard that one before. And as I said, lots of reasons. One of them is our own contextual culture, where we've got more of a combative culture, where that's how we understand how we resolve conflict. We go to court, we go to war. That's the dominant paradigm. We don't engage in our differences. There's a great book called The Third Side, which I don't think I mentioned in the resource list, but I absolutely adore that book because it's an anthropologist who had a chance to go to these different peace cultures to see how do these peace cultures operate. And there are a couple of key things that we don't do in our culture that peace-oriented cultures do. And I won't get into what they are right now. You can learn more if you hang out with me. But essentially, it's another one of the reasons why we're so afraid and so uncomfortable with conflict. So I think the very first thing I'm going to, if you'd like, I'd like to offer a way of thinking of conflict, if you think that would be helpful for people.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so I'm going to say a couple things about how to look at it and see what lands on people. So one way to look at conflict is to think of it as a dance. Like switch your metaphor, switch your picture. Sometimes in workshops that I do, I have people pick a picture of what conflict seems to represent to them, and they'll pick things like daggers or, an elephant smashing somebody's body or, drowning, these various kind of images that are really getting into our unresourced self. And so if we can reimagine the image of conflict, that it's an opportunity for transformation, that it's the eye of the storm, that it's an actual dance that we're doing. So that's one thing I want to offer. Play around, play around with what image you might want to choose to have around conflict? Is it a transformational opportunity for growth? Or is it something that's just bringing you down? So that's
Mm.
one thing. I'll offer something else, but I want to stop there for a minute.
So what comes to mind when you say that, and I'd love to hear feedback from those our live viewers here today, just about what you said, because what comes to mind for me, it's a visualization exercise, right? So you're so right. We all have biases, right? So some of that is stemmed from things that we just can't change, right? It goes back to the fight, flight, freeze. This what happens in the amygdala when we're under conflict, and this goes back to, decades of ancestral history when everyone was simply on guard all of the time. And who wants to be on guard all of the time? Nobody. But this idea of visualizing something that's softer, kinder, gentler, in terms of how we communicate with people. Yet, if there's a way of not personalizing it, and I think that's the hardest part. At least it's the hardest part for me, if I'm like truly honest, is not personalizing this. And then there's also those organizations where it's just not part of the culture. There's an element of psychological safety. And what comes to mind for me is a book that I read by Patrick Lencioni. You and I have talked about Lencioni's work before, Five Dysfunctions of a Team, where in short, it's the team didn't feel safe to counter opinions. There was a fear of conflict. And when they did, it was like, okay, well, yeah, Julia, just have your way. It's fine, right? So it was passive aggressive.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm curious. I'm going to take a look at the chat here to see what's happening here. So Hillary shared. Let me put this up on screen here. Where are we here? Let me just take a look here, because I think that there's some great comments in the chat here. Let's take a look. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Video is just resetting from the beginning. There will be a recording, 100%. Thank you for that, Hillary. If you're not catching it, some technical difficulties, you could always log off and log back on. That might help. But let's hear from Elizabeth. Starts as an individual dance, but quickly morphs into a collective dance. Yeah. What do you think about that, Julia?
Yeah, a couple things. One is, I think it's important that this collective have a common understanding about how we do conflict together. So that, you mentioned code of conduct. There are gentler, sort of less formal ways to start talking about how do we want to do conflict together. And I wrote my thesis for my master's degree on gossip in the workplace. It's available on my website. We didn't put it as a resource, but Elizabeth's putting her finger right on it in terms of the impact that conflict has. Because if you and I have a conflict together, Michelle, I'm going to go to Elizabeth and I'm going to complain to her about you. And you're going to go to your husband or whomever, or another colleague in that little unit, water cooler unit, you're going to complain about me. And then we're going to have this office division, which Elizabeth is referring to, I think. And the way around that, as I said, is to have communal understandings. This is where this has been a theme in our conversation today is, what kind of culture do we want to be building together through mutual understanding? And I want to add one more piece around a way to think about conflict. And I think it relates to Elizabeth's comment. And that is to think of conflict the way that the Sufis speak about the tale of the 8 blind men and the elephant, which I first heard at the Justice Institute, where I teach, and I've been teaching for a long, long time at the Center for Conflict Resolution. But there the tale is told of the 8 blind men and the elephant who are around an elephant. And each person has a perspective on what the elephant is like. And if you've got a more of a relativist perspective, you'll think, well, I think an elephant is like a rope. And then you'll say, Michelle, as you were talking about Lencioni, if somebody else has the ear and says an elephant is like a fan, then in a relativist perspective, they'll just go, well, that's fine. You have your perspective, I'll have mine. But actually, where the power is not to disagree, because your reality is a reality I need to understand the greater truth of the elephant. This brings my perspective somewhere else. I can't take it personally, Michelle. Why would I take it personally that you're standing on a different part of the elephant? I want to know about what your reality is. I want to understand it. I don't necessarily want to agree with it. You're standing at the trunk and you're holding a leg. I want to honor that. And I want to understand it, because then I'll understand the bigger elephant. And I want to share with you my reality of holding on to the ear of it. This is a very key philosophical cognitive construct that shifts us from thinking you're wrong, your perspective is something I disagree with, I need to negate. It's actually your perspective is going to bring richness to this conversation. It doesn't negate mine. We need all these perspectives to get a deeper understanding. And I think that's the true definition of collaboration.
Yeah. And stepping away from I'm being judged and recognizing that someone is, there's an opportunity to really listen, tune in. And if that judgment is coming from likely our habits or patterns of the past, this is all around mindfulness, right? Be mindful of those triggers. Then you really have an opportunity to, what you were saying is really listening to the different perspectives. And so I think there is a real gift in that.
Yes.
So Julia, we know that conflict is in short good for us. We can learn, we can grow. It's good for organizations, good for personal and professional development. But what should we do if we're like, okay, this style of communicating at work isn't working for us anymore? What advice would you have for leaders who are ready to become more conflict competent?
Yeah. A couple things. I guess firstly is to continue to hold on to themselves, whether it's through using some of, getting mindfulness training or whatever, because I think we really need to be humble as leaders and to connect with our hearts. And HeartMath has done so much good research in the last couple of decades, really, about the power of the heart and how when we're operating from our heart, we're actually sending more signals from our heart to our brain than our brain is sending down to our heart. So that's the very first thing, I think. And then secondly, to educate yourself. There's so much good information out there about how to have a difficult conversation in a respectful way. You can legislate it, you can create ground rules, you can have policies, but unless you're living that, firstly from your heart and modeling the way, and secondly through engaging constructively with conflict. So getting clear on getting a model, whether it's my model, which I have one, a difficult conversations model, or you learn nonviolent communication as a model, excuse me, fierce conversations. There are a lot of models out there, but coming together as a unit, as a team, and deciding, okay, this is how we're going to do conflict together.
Yeah. And then there's, conflict styles. There's, I talked a little bit about ancestral history, cultural background, gender, occupation, all of these types of things. Like I think that there are some career occupations that are maybe a little bit more like this inherently, and others that aren't. And so even going back to like things like debating in school, I was always intimidated by those sorts of things, because it was always like, well, what do you mean you're countering my opinion right now, right here, and I got to respond? I can't do that, right? So I also think that it's a bit about training, right? How you would train your body going to the gym, how you would practice yoga. I'm a yoga practitioner. All of these things require effort. And sometimes you need an expert. Sometimes you need someone like Julia to help stimulate the conversation. And sometimes it's just about, let's talk about this. Can we not just talk about this as a team, as an organization, and see where it takes you? Or it could also be, I've got it in front of me here, but 5 dysfunctions of a team, right? Maybe you pick up a book like this. I really appreciated this book. And you dive into it as a leadership team. Those are some ideas. I'm just taking a look at time. Holy smokes, amazing how quickly time goes. Final question for you, Julia. What does it mean to have a healthy conflict culture?
Well, you've mentioned Lencioni's book a couple times. I really like his later book, The Advantage, because with The Advantage, he takes the 5 dysfunctions of the team and he makes it a first principle to understand how you build a healthy team. And I think The Advantage was written in 2012 or something. But essentially, that's how I think you would define it, which is this ability to be able to firstly have this psychological safety, emotional safety. And that has to do with continuing to tune into the heart, right? That's what will create the safety. And then learn those skills on how to engage with conflict. And I'll just very briefly, I know we only have a couple minutes, but I do want to refer to one skill. You were talking about conflict as a skill, like yoga would be a skill. It absolutely is a skill. And I'll tell you one that's very powerful, which is to be in the practice of separating out my evaluations about what you're doing, my judgments or my interpretations, to get practiced as an individual, as a leader, as a team, get practice on separating that from what are the objective facts about something. And it sounds simple in theory, and it is simple in theory, but in practice, to support each other, to realize, oh, even something as simple as you're late is an evaluation of my understanding about 9:15 and your understanding about 9:08.
Right.
So I just wanted to leave it on that note that there are very demonstratable skills that I help people do to move through conflict that move people to more love, more peace, more heart, more understanding. I've seen it happen again and again and again. And I'm very confident that there are key things we can do to help us move through conflict and transform it to be healthy.
You're so passionate about this, Julia. I really appreciate, Julia reached out to me to be a guest on Mindful Mondays, and I'm so glad that you did, Julia. Thank you so much. We have something to share with our viewers here. There's a free gift here from Julia. So I'm going to drop this in the chat. Julia, can you share a few words about this?
Yes, it's actually a tool that I mentioned in my book, Hold On to Yourself. And it connects with mindfulness, which is why I thought it would be a nice thing for today's show. Essentially, it's a tool that shows you if you're in a healthy or relaxed or heart-based state, that's the place that we want to develop and continue to grow. If you're in a yellow state, kind of slightly triggered, there's other things you need to be doing. It's that deep breathing and kind of coming back to yourself. But if you're in a red zone, you're highly triggered. I've learned through my own experience as a mediator, that is not the time. Nothing good. If you think that's true, that's true. Nothing good will come from this conversation. So you need to take a break, not abandon the conversation, but take a break for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, an hour, whatever it is, and commit to coming back. So it's a mindfulness tool that helps people think about green, yellow, red zones for ourselves.
Thank you so much. Tap into that. I put these links in the chat. I know there's been some tech issues today. I don't know if that's a LinkedIn issue, but the recording will be available. Of course, you can reach out to Julia as well. She has a monthly newsletter. I have a monthly newsletter. It's a great way to stay in touch with what's happening. And to close, I want to thank all of our viewers for your comments in the chat, some resources that were shared there. Thank you, Felicia. I'm taking a look at who's here. Ronnie, Elizabeth, Barbara, Stefan, Hillary, thank you all so much for showing up today. And in terms of what's happening next month, I'm working on something exciting. What I can tell you, I can't share yet, but what I can tell you is that next Mindful Monday is on October the 17th. Of course, that is a Monday. Stay tuned here on LinkedIn to find out more. And thank you again, Julia, for your presence and for sharing your knowledge.
Thank you.
And until next time, everyone, be well.